Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 135, brought to you by executive producer Adrian Camoens. Thank you very much for your support. You just heard The View from Eucharist. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I am Jason.
And that was from the Deaf Metal Sampler, a very rare piece that Jason does have in his possession.
Yeah.
Through Def Records.
Def Records.
And this is back in the days...
Not Def Row. But
No.
Yeah.
DEAF, like you can't hear. But this is back in the day when actually, like the war comp and, projections of a stained mind, back when comps meant something, when there's actually exclusive
What was the one
tracks and
Century
stuff.
Media did that I have? And you've got too.
Oh, Jesus.
The great one with Asphyx and Tiamat and all that sort of stuff.
My mind's not working at the moment.
I'm trying to remember too. Anyways, but that was another classic one, of that era. And this one had like At the Gates, The Architects, had Dissection, Vital Remains, Nightfall, Therion, like the good era of Therion, Pitch Shifter. Just a lot of really pretty interesting bands.
More to Skull, dude.
More to Skull.
Some people like them.
Now, the thing that I think obviously jumps out to you as you are probably maybe grabbing the jaw and putting it back into your, asphyxiating it back up to your mouth with that song, The View, is the drums and just the energy, the pure energy of the song. I mean, the melodicism of the riffs and just
everything's fired and over, it's firing all cylinders over the top completely. And this, in The View, I actually did some research on this as well. And talked with one of our consultants, Chris Dick, writer for, was original, co-editor of the Requiem magazine, also writes for Decibel, among other things. And this was, we either thought it was a drum machine, but I think now it's just the introduction of triggers, and I think the kick drum is heavily triggered.
Gotcha. Just
because it has that really weird tone to it. Because this was also kind of in the era of a lot of these Greek bands, like Elysian Fields, for instance, where we'd heard these records and we're like, oh my God, there's no way a human can do that. And in fact, they couldn't because they were drum machines. And a lot of the time the drum machine was named something, so you assumed it was a member of the band. Yeah. So this is still, what year is this? Like
93 is when I do believe this.
So there, at this point, there'd been a lot of blast beat things happening, but as far as like the clarity of the recording, that was kind of like another level. And this was just kind of like, holy crap, this is like the fastest thing ever. And then we heard like the first Dimension Zero EP, and it was like, oh my God, it kept amping up and scaling up, what was possible with drums. And now it's a totally different story because apparently kids have like retard strength and can do things that we couldn't imagine doing back in the day.
But I still would take a song like The View over most anything else of the modern era, only because of that youthfulness of it. And I mean, the fact that when you hear the totality of what Daniel Erslandison, the drummer from Eucharist, is going to do throughout all the songs we're going to be playing on the show here, and then you take into mind all the other bands that he's sort of contributed to, whether it be, he's the drummer now permanently of Arch Enemy, did Armageddon, was he in Serum?
No, he did Liars in Wait. He toured with Carcass.
Yeah. He did In Flames,
2 tracks off that.
Yeah. And so, he's the brother of Adrian Erslandison of At the Gates fame and Cradle of Filth fame and stuff. And, so obviously there's some kind of pedigree that exists in this family. But the fact that these guys, when they wrote this song, were 14 or 15 years old
that was the big
mind-blowing.
Thing, especially when we got Velvet Creation and just the kind of, it wasn't, the buzz around it was totally different than buzz around something today, but within tape trading circles and fanzines and things like that, everybody was kind of blown away at the youth of how technically proficient these kids were, even though when you listen to a lot of the stuff off these 2 records, there's the time changes aren't exact, they're weird and off, and everything's a little bit, it's not perfect, but as far as being that, I think the youthful enthusiasm totally makes up for any kind of like lack of musical ability.
Well, it kind of reminds you in a way of, and this goes back to an older episode we did, like Ablaze My Sorrow, and the same kind of like youthfulness that was there and the naivety, but that made it sort of interesting and
I think endearing, so too. And same with, we talked about a million times the whole Immortal riffing pattern wouldn't have come out of them if they had traditional training.
Yeah.
And speaking of Blaze My Sorrow, we have some kind of Kevin Bacon-ish comparisons here at some point we can go into.
Okay. Cool. It makes sense because that scene was pretty incestuous in a lot of ways, you know, the whole melodic death metal scene. And for some people's money, Eucharist comes out alongside At the Gates at the point where At the Gates is developing or evolving, I would say, from the sort of grotesque type sound, which it
was kind of influenced by Elf,
All Life Ends and things like that, the early kind of stuff, into this more melodic thing that At the Gates will really sort of open up on Red in the Sky Is Ours, which is the sort of first full length that they do, which Red in the Sky Is Ours was put out in 92, and the next record with Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness was 93, which was the same year that the death metal comp came out, and the same year that the Greeting Immortality 7-inch, which was Eucharist, is, you know, alongside their early demos, kind of the first thing that was coming out. So it's all kind of happening around the same time, but there are some people that have put the award on the back of Eucharist for being the first traditional, like, honest to goodness melodic death.
But they were, you know, 89's kind of the year that's, you know, they're credited with, you know, with forming, and I would assume writing songs at that point. But I mean,
89, they'd be 10. That's the thing that just
I don't know an exact age
what they could
thing either. I know they were not in their 20s when they recorded Velvet Creation. I know that for a fact. I mean, just look at.
Well, I've heard like they're 15 or 16 around the time that Velvet Creation came out.
So I mean, really, it's not inconceivable that 10-year-olds would start a band if you've got the access to musical equipment that you do in Sweden, in a socialized, you know, country. Sure. That if you want to learn how to play drums, you go to the community center, you play drums.
Well, and probably Adrian was older, obviously, than Daniel. Probably was. You know,
there could have been, you know, his dad might have been a studio musician or something too. For, you know, kids can start playing like unbelievable ages.
Well, and one of the things that you pointed out is that you feel as if these guys, or maybe you heard through the grapevine back when you guys were, you know, doing, you know, Requiem and stuff like that, that these guys had some background in.
I think they might have had some jazz
stuff,
education as far as their musical pedigree, but I'm not. That's just what I'm. I mean,
some of the choices that they make, and especially when we get to like stuff on the War Comp and things like that, is almost this like the same approach that King Crimson like came, but I'm not comparing them. They're not progressive in that they understand how to do all the things that King Crimson could do musicality wise, but just they make a lot of really odd choices that fit.
It could just be it could just be being naive and young and not knowing that, okay, you're off a half a step on the drums here, and so is the bass, but somehow it comes together and makes sense.
Yeah. But these guys are certainly, I don't know, they're a band that's not talked about in circles much anymore, because they essentially broke up in 97, 98, you know, amicably.
Well, and they broke up before that as well once, too.
Yeah, they took a couple breaks through the years, you know.
And the only real consistent guy in the scene was Erlandson.
Yeah.
And he was the only guy, basically, that's continued to go on to do other things. I mean, the other major, I guess the kind of core guys originally was... let me look up. Jesus, my notes are a mess. Marcus Johansson, guitar and vocals. Heinrich Mjiner. I'm gonna guess how it's pronounced. Who knows? I would say Mjiner. It doesn't matter at this point. It was actually credited on several of the releases, but never recorded on any of the releases. So I'm guessing he's a live guitar player. He would go on to be in the band Cromlech, which, when did that come out? 2000
or 2001, yeah,
something like that, and some tiny little labor
Vulture Tones,
which also had dudes from A Blaze My Sorrow, the vocalist that was on the Plague record, and also had the bass player from Meshuggah, Armageddon, and Heinrich, and that as well. So then another dude,
6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon,
another dude that was not anything else. I'm not going to butcher his name.
Gotcha. So basically, it was mainly the vocalist and guitarist, and then the drummer.
And then Tobias Gustafsson, bass player, was also one of the three main dudes there. But
you know, you're right, and they sort of, in the midst of this explosion that happened in the mid-90s of melodic death metal, they kind of were nowhere to be found, and then they emerged with one last record, Mirrorworlds, which was fairly experimental in its own weird way. I mean, it wasn't a straightforward melodic death metal record that they probably, had they had maybe a smarter marketing scheme, they could have probably raked in off of the trend that was going and maybe prolonged their career. But I mean,
it could have been the case that, you know, you start that young. This could have just been a passing phase that, okay, I don't think I really want to play death metal anymore. This isn't going to be a career option. At that point, there wasn't a whole lot of bands that were showing outside of like Morbid Angel and Entombed. Well, not even after that point, I don't think Entombed was making a ton of cash.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't know if, I mean, a lot of people look, same with, you know, being in the arts, a lot of people realize that, okay, I'm going to be poor for a long time. Screw that, I want a boat. I'm going to become an accountant or something. Yeah. You know, so that could have been the case as well.
Yeah. It's just too bad, because I think as we went back and delved into this stuff, and I've always known this because I've been such a huge fan, I think their songs on the War Comp are my favorite moment of that whole compilation, is just how talented they were. You know, they really had a lot of really cool ideas, and you can hear them come to fruition even in like a primitive song like The View, in that they're taking a left of center approach of like writing metal and then putting like stuff in that and making choices like that you wouldn't normally
well
make.
Even like they're only 4 years out from from Entombed and Nihilist and all that kind of stuff, and how primitive that stuff was. This is almost you can see the marked advancement in as far as the proficiency of musicians in this whole scene is so crazy. Like every 10 years or something, like you gotta listen to a Vader record or watch a studio video of them recording something. It's just like, how the hell do you do that on drum? Like just recording technology, everything is starting to step up. So the whole scene is just kind of like
it's evolved
really quickly.
And and so I don't know, and this might be a band we've had requests for this band before, and there's certainly a band that we enjoy, but again, we don't get in conversation very often with people that are really that heavily interested in Eucharist. Most people know from the Gothenburg scene, of course, At the Gates, Dark Tranquility and Flames, then Arch Enemy kind of slightly evolves out of there. They're kind of not geographically located in that same place, but
the same kind of aesthetic scene.
But Black Earth is not that far from, say, what Mirrorworlds and stuff was sort of going for, with a little more carcass vibe to it. But so they're part of all of that, and they're credited as being one of the progenitors alongside probably At the Gates, and yet I don't think a lot of people really throw back and give them a lot of credit historically, for doing that. And
it could just be a result of obscurity as well.
But I think it's interesting to me. It seems like this would be one of those records that, I don't know, you could maybe even throw into the pantheon. Well, not this record, but the record Velvet Creation, which we're going to get into in a moment. I mean, I don't know. It'd be up for debate whether or not it would qualify as something like, say, in the Decibel Hall of Fame, based on the sort of impact that it had on creating global, like melodic death metal. Did it or did it not? Did it have as much impact as the Gallery did? But did it influence the bands around them to start playing this a little bit more? It might not have sold a lot of records, but
and just listening to or watching the At the Gates and Dark Tranquility documentaries that they've put out in the last couple of years, a lot of them are just like everybody was sharing riffs. The scene was really just a bunch of kids. I don't think they really had the foresight to know, okay, or to trace back to one specific point this might have been an important band. But the cool thing about the show is, in hindsight, we can go back and reinvestigate records that we can kind of piece together in the whole,
and try and make some sense of
the whole timeline.
And speaking of Dark Tranquility, I mean, I mentioned before, like Red in the Sky Is Ours, which was sort of, I guess, probably the first really, truly great technical melodic death metal record out of Sweden, that really had all these like great melodic hooks in it and stuff on like Neverwhere and Claws of Laughter Dead and stuff like that. This record and Eucharist's sound sort of falls halfway between that and maybe some of the ideas that In Flames was doing on like Lunar Strain and Dark Tranquility was doing Sky Dancer. It's like, but
you could hear
it's rawer than those pretty Dark Tranquility and Flames kind of stuff, but yet it's,
well, they seem to bypass the entire, like a lot of the Wrong Again record stuff this is the label that they're on, had a heavy thrash influence too. The whole first kind of wave of Swedish death
metal, a lot of the Destruction Creator influence sort of stuff.
And even a little bit later on in bands like Excretion and Space Knot and something. There's a couple of the other. Let me look at
Miscreant.
And Miscreant. You can definitely hear like a lot of Metallica and Exodus kind of guitar crunch influence, and guitar solos and things like that.
This is almost like devoid of it in a weird way.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have the same, because At the Gates at that point I think was much more avant-garde than Velvet Creation ends up being, but somehow they end up kind of going on that thrash tangent as well. A couple years later, perfecting it, taking like all the energy of Slayer, throwing it into death metal. You got that. But this was just its own kind of weird anomaly.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of classical influences, and you'll hear that when we get into the opening track of Velvet Creation, which is Greeting Immortality, has a kind of great kind of classical acoustic intro.
I mean, these kids can really play really well. And I think even that it's a death metal record, there's definitely classical arrangements and stuff to it.
Yeah, and so where we're going to start, before we get into Velvet Creation, is we've got one of the demo tunes from a 7-inch that I have that I got a hold of back in New Moon. I don't know how I even found, it was just like there. Chris probably ordered it, and no one else wanted a Eucharist 7-inch at that point.
So you got hidden behind something. I would have bought it in a second.
I'm lucky to have it, but it's a version
I might even have it, actually.
Into the Cosmic Sphere, which you'll find a more polished version of this on the Velvet Creation disc. But what's
War
cool about
number
this,
one.
Yeah, War Wrong Again Records number one is Velvet Creation. But this Greeting Immortality 7-inch has obviously a much more rawer sound, but the production is just way different in terms of how the drums were produced, in terms of vocals and different things.
To me, I've done a little bit of
powerful.
Yeah, a little bit of drum recording, and it sounds like he just threw a condenser mic in the room with the drums. And because the cymbals, they totally overmodulate and just like, they don't decay or anything. But then the kick drum and the snare sound great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the guitars are a little distant, but the whole thing has really good energy to it.
Yeah, it has sometimes a punch to it, sometimes it's weird, So, and then we'll transition from this Greeting Immortality song into a trio of tunes from a Velvet Creation. And I guess, again, some of the things to be listening for as you're hearing this is the at the gates kind of stuff. But just think about, these 15, 16-year-olds, however old they were, they're very young, let's just put it that way, how they're crafting these songs that go, I don't know, they don't follow traditional patterns. I mean, they have some really like cool melodic riffs and things that are weaving their way through, but it's
a hodgepodge of riffs, but they managed to have it's pretty seamless when it's all said and done. The guitar tone is another thing, is
bizarre.
It's really, I don't even know how to really describe it. I mean, it has like a kind of like vacant, weird, like haunting kind of quality to it.
A melancholy and empty kind of.
Yeah, something. And the place they recorded at, that doesn't really ring a bell. It has like a total vibe that this place didn't normally record death metal. Yeah. But it's one of the better early on death metal recordings, I think, as well. So everything seems a little bit more, I guess, separated, and I guess there's kind of like a vacancy to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. A little, like a lot of space in it as well, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and it was recorded in '93 at Music Mafian in Varberg by a guy by the name of Fredrik Lernemo.
Which, the name or the place does not ring a bell. I can't think of another place that,
he's not one of those big Swedish producer names that was so prominent in the early 90s, mm-hmm. But, and there's, again, when we get to the second of these tunes, after the second of the Velvet Creation tunes, My Bleeding Tears, for those of you that are old school At the Gates fans, listen for the Neverwhere riff, because I hear it all over the place in that song.
You'll hear lots of At the Gates solos.
Yeah. Velvet Creation itself is,
which is funny because they kind of predate the albums that we remember. At the Gates for playing these songs.
I know. Yeah. But we'll hear a lot of stuff in Mirrorworlds too as well when we get into it later. But so we've got Into the Cosmic Sphere from the Greeting Immortality 7-inch, and then we've got Greeting Immortality, My Bleeding Tears, and the title track of Velvet Creation, all three of which can be found on Velvet Creation. Enjoy. Velvet Creation, My Bleeding Tears, Greeting Immortality, and Into the Cosmic Sphere. Do you remember when this record came out for you and Chris? I mean, you said there was a lot of buzz based on the age and stuff like that, but because this was the first like W.A.R. record kind of thing, I mean, did it do very well? I mean, do you remember? I know it was tough getting W.A.R. stuff in the States, Well,
I think we got a lot of it either through Relapse Mail Order was usually pretty good at the time for it. Some of it just could have been some random overseas thing where we send, I think at this point we were spending $24 for a CD, and you put, cash in an envelope and wait a month and then you get your CD. There wasn't any kind of anticipation about this being like some kind of, label that was going to, affect anything.
Yeah.
But it was just, I don't know if this was the first W.A.R. release we got either, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that would almost make sense that you might have gotten something.
And then would have went back and got this. I don't remember at this point. But as soon as we started getting a couple W.A.R. releases, it was like, the Blue Note records of Swedish death metal for us. It was just this, like, everything they put out was just like stellar, over the top. Every band had its own kind of unique sound. Nobody sounded exactly the same at all.
No, and I remember that was sort of the watershed label. When I first got introduced to this kind of metal from Chris. I was right away a melodic guy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I don't know if a lot of it might have just been our area. I don't know that many other people have as much reverence for the W.A.R. label that we do.
Yeah.
But I think it's a hell of a label. I mean, just look at the pedigree of stuff they have on there and how good it is and how obscure a lot of the stuff still is.
Yeah, I've
got most of the stuff, all the W.A.R. CDs, but there's a handful that have eluded me. But like Excretion and.
Oh, you don't have that Excretion?
No, I do have that one now. But that, and what the hell is the other one now?
I mean, I got
the two big ones.
Excretion and Miscreant, and then I'm trying to remember.
It's getting late at night, folks. Sorry, we're spacing out.
I don't have Spiritual Beggars, which is the second W.A.R. release.
I don't have that either. I guess I'm lying. I got a handful. I'd say I've got 3/4 of them.
Do you? Oh, nice.
But yeah, just everything was kind of weird. Even the bands like Morning Sign, which weren't exactly my cup of tea, were still like interesting, more doomy.
Well, Morning Sign, did they put out stuff on W.A.R.? Because they were on Godhead Records for a while. Because I remember I had to review a Morning Sign thing. I
thought they put out one record.
They may have, yeah. But I know that at one point they were in Godhead Records because I have a Morning Sign record that I have. So they had a really good EP that was.
Well, at the time of the release of the W.A.R. comp, they had Eucharist, Spiritual Beggars, In Flames, Lunar Strain, Miscreant, Dreaming Ice.
Yeah. So the only one I don't have out of that is the Spiritual Beggars. So
which isn't very good, actually.
Yeah. I like some of the stuff down the road. I think I had an opportunity to get that Spiritual Beggars in New York City. It was the summer of 2002 when I was there visiting a ex-girlfriend, and it was when the Powerwall went out. And I could not buy it because the cash registers wouldn't work. So they
stole it.
So they told me to come back and just. I think it was one of the first two Spiritual Beggars, but
that's okay.
Anyways, but now we're to the point where Eucharist, for whatever reason, doesn't get much. I don't know. They don't get much momentum coming off of Velvet Creation, it seems.
Well, there's no distribution in the United States either for it. That was the thing that W.A.R. never really had any. I don't think that they might have been distributed by like Candlelight at some point, or I don't even remember at this point. Everything was all import only.
Yeah.
So I know the availability wasn't that much. Of course, nobody's going to be touring over here or anything for it too. So I think it was just kind of obscurity. And by the time it got over here in mail orders, sometimes a year after a thing came out.
Well, do you think this about Eucharist and Velvet Creation was sort of like overshadowed by some of the stuff that Dark Tranquility and In Flames?
Oh, I would assume
some of those bands were starting to do.
But even In Flames wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, it wasn't really until Jester Race.
When they got huge, but at least Dark Tranquility stuff, even being on Osmos, was distributed in the States.
Yeah,
a lot of that stuff, a lot of the Peaceville stuff, the At the Gate stuff was coming out over here as well. It could have just been, lost to obscurity kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a bummer because what happens next for this band is they'll take a little bit of a break and then they'll kind of get back together to record a couple of tunes for the W.A.R. compilation. Mm-hmm. And for my money, and I don't know where you stand on this, but I think Wounded Alone and The Predictable End are compositionally the best things that these guys ever did.
They're pretty damn good songs.
Wounded Alone, just the the melodic interplay between the guitar and the bass and what Erlandson is doing with his offbeat drums, it's so, I mean, it's almost like, to me it goes back to Wagner's definition of progressive. It's progressive in that way. It's not progressive because they're trying to do like Rush and Dream Theater kind of stuff, but it's just, I've still never heard anybody quite match that type of sound and make it sound not only technical and like abstract, but like super listenable. Like it just it flows. It's beautiful. It's warm. It's
not overly tight either. It's all the whole thing's got a lot of like air and breath to it, and there's not. It's even like as much as I like a band like Obscura or something, that stuff is incredibly tight.
Yeah,
and this Eucharist had this weird I think it was just naivete on the kids' part and just youthful exuberance that got this thing where it is. Because I think if they actually sat down and thought too much about what they're doing, it'd just be like, holy crap! It's not, because playing music, I've played with people occasionally, but even when I'm playing by myself or similarly with art, sometimes the more you're thinking about it while you're doing it, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of shed that the critical eye or whatever and just go for it, and you evaluate after the fact. Same with drumming and stuff too. If you just kind of just let it go. I've talked to jazz musicians that have told me the same thing, that I'm not, if I worried about when to come in or when how fast I had to play this bit or all this kind of stuff, I go nuts. It's all feel.
Yeah, and that they sound like a very much a feel band. And if you haven't had the pleasure of listening to the W.A.R. comp, which is still, I think, fairly tough to get a hold of,
it's $100 CD.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get on eBay like 3-4 years ago for a decent price, because of course I famously passed up the W.A.R. comp as it was at New Moon Records for like a year and a half. I just stared at it and said, why do I want a compilation?
Yeah,
I'd rather buy like a real CD.
See, the thing for any kind of compilation, you look on the back for the asterisks.
Yeah,
exclusive tracks.
Yeah, and these certainly were exclusive. Wounded Alone, Predictable End. I think Wounded Alone showed up on the War Dance a little bit later, which was a later W.A.R. comp kind of thing.
Want to change from Wrong Again Records to W.A.R. Records.
Yeah. So, but these two songs that are going to kick this off, I mean, prepare yourself. This is you might have to rewind it a couple times because it's.
Well, we've actually had these on a previous show, but
but
it was a long time
many
ago.
moons ago. It was like 115 episodes ago.
It was a long time ago.
But yeah, and from here we're going to transition into the first pair of tunes from Mirrorworlds, which was the sort of the last thing that these guys did in '97. But I do believe that the W.A.R. comp songs were from '95. Does that sound about right?
I think so. I think it was before their break.
Yeah. So, and then was there something you were going to say about Mirrorworlds before we went to break?
Nope, I was just looking at the CD.
So we've got Wounded Alone and the Predictable End from the W.A.R. comp, and then we've got With the Sun and the eponymous The Eucharist from Mirrorworlds. Enjoy. the Eucharist, With the Sun, The Predictable End, and Wounded and Alone. And one of the things that's interesting about the difference between the War Comp songs and then where they kind of end up in the end with Mirrorworlds to me is The Predictable End and Wounded and Alone they're not really in the camp of, say, At the Gates anymore. They're sort of like really musically doing their own thing. I mean, maybe there's some hints of the kind of weird progressiveness of like, at the not At the Sky, but Red in the Sky Is Ours.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. But it's not the same as, say, Velvet Creation, where it was very not mimicking, but very much in that same realm as Red in the Sky and the Gallery.
I think if they would have recorded a record at this point where they did those two tracks, it'd be a totally different.
Yeah, and it might have been kind of put them somewhere different.
Because really, I think Mirrorworlds is, as good as it is, it still seems like it's okay. Let's do one last hurrah for fun. It doesn't seem like it doesn't have the kind of passion that I think Velvet Creation had, or the kind of enthusiasm behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done well. Those songs are good and everything, but it's not like a stellar record.
Sure. I mean, they're all playing like at their best, but in terms of like innovative stuff, the main riff and With the Sun is definitely like from Terminal Spirit Disease, At the Gates kind of era, but I mean, you have to give it up for that song for the punishment of the drums that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some of, it's up there with The View probably in terms of like his best performance of this era, before he goes on to Arch Enemy sort of stuff. And then the Eucharist, the sort of instrumental tune there, it's just sort of a groovy number. It kind of falls in line. You and I both hear, Celestial Season.
Oh, totally. It's just, there's not a whole lot of instrumentals of this length of bands back then. I listened to this like 4 times a couple days ago too. It's just like, I forgot how good that track was. I never really paid attention before.
It's just got a nice sort of melody line that it hooks itself around, very groove laden, and kind
of has like almost a Finnish vibe to some of the guitar playing and stuff
for
too.
Sure. And I think we mentioned that in the Celestial Season show that it sort of has like that Zizma or convulse kind of thing going on for it. The tone is
just that weird fuzzed out 70s guitar kind of vibe with death metal vocals. It was a weird, the thing here's, I don't think I've ever mentioned this in the show before, the kind of genre that they've never mixed before with death metal. It's 50s rock and roll, like Chuck Berry with death metal vocals.
I mean, I think Entomb wants to do some of that sort of stuff sometimes.
They come close. I mean, if you took like Helicopters and sped it up a little bit and threw like LG Petrov on vocals there, it can be interesting. I think it was a missed opportunity.
Maybe some of our listeners out there are musicians and they can be inspired to.
If I could play it on guitar, I would try, but I can't. I can just do power chords.
We can write songs for you though. We can give you some inspiration ideas of, hey, make it sound like this and this,
and put us in the thanks list.
Do some.
Having trouble with your band? Let us know.
How would Buddy Holly and Dark Tranquility sound together? Try that. Just do it. And Buddy Holly played some hard guitar. If you watch him play, he was like just riffing the hell out of it.
You just throw a distortion pedal on it, man. That stuff's sweet.
Exactly. Then now you're cooking. Cooking with gas. But so this, I was endeared to this record because I think I wanted it to be bigger than what it was, and I think I was such a fan of Eucharist off the War Comp. Like I was kind of like, here's their big record, and then they just sort of faded away.
Well, they have the weird the oboe track and Nakedness on there as well,
which I dug.
It's a weird choice. You kind of talked about off mic how you're exploring a lot of like jazz and Radiohead and stuff at that point, so it could make sense, but I think in the context for your listening, but I think in the context of the record itself, it seems kind of out of place.
It is a weird song. It might have fit better, more in the middle, but to put it kind of near the end, it's sort of a momentum killer almost.
Oh, absolutely.
When you're trying to kind of come to
you got to put that before the halfway point or something if you're going to do that.
But it fit in '97, which is when the record came out with OK Computer and self-titled Portishead and a lot of the stuff that I think people my age who were maybe metalheads were open to, in a way. DJ Shadow and some of that sort of stuff. It was just, it had some soundscape aspects, some record scratching kind of going on, and then the oboe stuff was very very melancholy. It reminded me of a kind of a Japanese composer that I dig a lot, named Toru Takamitsu, where it was almost like a film score, kind of unsettling kind of thing going on. But Yeah, but ultimately it's their final statement, and not a bad one, as Mark said, but again, it probably doesn't have the passion that the W.A.R songs or the Velvet Creation stuff had,
I mean, it holds up well, and if you've never heard it, I mean, compared to, it's a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of what we're hearing now.
A lot of melodic crap that
there's too much melodic crap right now.
This still had some teeth to it, and that's the thing, like, one of the things about Eucharist that, was maybe a criticism to some, but also I think a testament to like their ability to not back down or be a trendy kind of band was, the vocals were always like very in your face. They were very kind of
really
harsh.
high and screechy, and I mean, compared to everything else, they definitely stand out a lot amidst the musicianship of everything else.
And he wasn't trying to like, they weren't trying to like tone it down to make it like catchier or hookier or whatever. It was
it's totally that's what it is. Those are especially on Velvet Creation. Those are the vocals of a young kid. Those could never be duplicated by somebody 10 years older. There's no way.
Yeah, and that's for sure. And so the tunes we're going to sort of end things with tonight, we've got Fallen, which is sort of based around a Dark Tranquility riff, and then we've got sort of a short, punchy tune, fast and furious, called Blood Red Stars, which kind of ends Mirrorworlds, and features some cool. You point out it's kind of like an Evil Dead kind of vocal effects thing.
Yeah, they did it on Cemetery Records and stuff as well. But it's just basically the "I'll Swallow Your Soul" kind of modulated effect kind of deal,
which is pretty fun, And again, this is a band that obviously had come to an end in metal, and we're just sort of,
seems like they're just having fun with this record, really, when it comes down to it.
And so that's.
We hope you did too.
Yeah, let us know what you thought about Eucharist, in our tired state of minds, and shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on iTunes. Leave us a star rating. Leave us a review. Somebody just left a review actually the other day, a new one. It had been a while since we got an iTunes review, but and then check us out on the website requiempodcast.com, where you can become an executive producer. You can bid on artwork, different. We've got mugs, all kinds of
crap. We've got anything to help the show out.
Yeah, and you can also help Mark out with your H.P. Lovecraft book.
By this time, it should still be going. Go to there's a button right on the side of the site there for Kickstarter, which I'm funding a H.P. Lovecraft adaptation of Dagon, a 6-page. Originally a 6-page short story. I'm turning it into an 80-page graphic novel, and it's already overfunded, but every little bit helps, and you get free stuff, you get incentives for helping me as well. It'd be greatly appreciated. And
it's even something like down the road, like that Mark and I have kicked around, possibly around Christmas time, wanting to compile some of the old magazines from Eclipse and Requiem, in the same way that recently Bazillion Points put out the Metallion Slayer mags. Obviously, we're not on that ilk or level of sort of
production value or clout.
Or the clout, I mean, Metallion was, hand in hand with the whole black metal scene and different things like that. But we do know that we had a pretty loyal following, and we know through the podcast that people are kind of into what we were doing, and it'd be cool for historical preservation purposes down the road.
Absolutely.
So Kickstarter is kind of an interesting little thing.
If we lived in Norway, we could probably get a grant from the government to do it.
You could, but instead we're going to probably have to rely on we're going to have to rely on as we said in the primordial shows, we're the empire. So
rely on the friendliness and pleasantness and what is it? Something of strangers.
Kindness of strangers.
Jeez,
it's Nick Cave.
Yeah, it's getting late.
Cave. So. But enjoy Fallen and Blood Red Stars from the Mirrorworld record, and we hope you enjoyed Eucharist. Let us know what you thought about these guys. Maybe if they were obscure to you, tell us what your thoughts on this
or if you thought they should have stayed obscure. Yeah. Let us know either way. We like controversy or controversy, depending on where you live.
There's no way you can totally hate this band. So, all right, for Eucharist, Fallen, and Blood Red Stars, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Reflections of my subconscious behind the story of everything. The lights and birds with flame. So bear witness to this euphoria.